Hi everybody, welcome back to Main Mission Hope, and I wanted to do a really quick video for people who are new to Christianity and are thinking about getting their first Bible and are really wondering, where on earth do I start? You end up with this paralysis of choice with Bibles, I think. And there's so many different types, so many different versions, so many different translations. Hopefully I'll be able to give you a little bit of guidance here. You may well have seen my other video, and I'll kind of repeat what I said in the beginning of that one, that the best Bible you have and the best Bible you can read is the one you have. So if you happen to have a particular Bible that's a particular translation, dive in and start reading it. It doesn't mean you have to have the perfect Bible. Also, I wanted to also discuss where to start with the Bible. And I think we might also have a little bit of chat about this book as well, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and the difference between Catholic and Protestant versions of Bibles. So let's get started. So these obviously are print Bibles. There's a nice little pocket one there with just the New Testament and the Psalms. And I would say that a print Bible is very important to a new Christian, because there's something about having the actual words on paper in front of you that you can touch and hold that I think is incredibly important and incredibly tactile. Now, I personally, when I'm just reading the Bible, I will read, I use the Blue Letter Bible app on my phone as well, because I can use that at work and it tracks where I am. But the beauty with the paper Bible is that you can flick through it, you can choose where, random things just to read, and they will often have things like maps in them and different references that you can go through. So always consider buying yourself a Bible. If you can get yourself to a local shop, even better, so that you can pick through the Bibles. So next off, so what have we got here? So these are both Catholic editions of their particular translations, and what the Catholic version means is that it has 73 books in it, whereas a Protestant Bible will have 66. And what it is, in the Catholic Bibles, they have six more. They have seven more in the Old Testament. New Testament's fine though. Now, if you're a person who's coming to Christianity and you haven't decided on a particular denomination yet, or maybe you're never going to decide a particular denomination yet, you're just going to keep visiting different churches, then I don't know, maybe the Catholic Bible is the best one to go for, because you get those extra books. So that's why now I'm in the Catholic Church and will be confirmed into the Catholic Church, so I've got the Catholic ones. Then we have two different translations. So we've got the ESV, so the English Standard Version, Anglicized version here, and then we've got the NRSV, which is the New Revised Standard Version. This is the Anglicized version. So when they say they're Anglicized, it just means that some of the words and some of the language has been changed so it's more suitable for British people versus American people. This particular one here, the ESV-CE, is also the official liturgical Bible for Catholics in the UK. I think it might be the whole of the UK. It's definitely England and Wales, which means that the passages that are in here are the same as the ones that you'll hear read out at Mass whenever you go to church. This is the English version they use. The NSRV, so the New Revised Standard Version, is recommended for personal study and reading, but is not a liturgical version. Also, if you're in America, the official liturgical version, so the official words they'll read out at Mass in America, is the neighbor version, which is the North American Bible Standard Revised Edition. I think what I'll do is I'll put links in the description below this video. Now, you're probably thinking, what on earth are you going on about, Rob? What do these things mean? And how does it affect the Bible itself? Well, remember, the core of what's written in them both is the same. Because the original text that these were based on was in Hebrew, it was in Aramaic, and it would have been in Greek. So we're talking at least 2,000 years ago, and much longer for the Old Testament. So it's been translated and copied and stuff like that. And with translation comes choices, especially when you consider that with English, the big problem with English is we have so many words where you can have one word that can mean so many different things. So if you take, for example, like the word love, so you could say, I love something, and you can say, well, I love hamburgers, I love my wife, I love my daughter, I love a nice day, I love the Bible, I love God, I love football, that sort of thing. Whereas when you go back to these ancient languages, like Greek, Hebrew, Latin as well, and Aramaic, they will have a different version of love depending on what you're loving. So that's where choices come in. Now, the difference between something like the NRSV and the ESV, probably the easiest way to understand it, is that the ESV is more of a word-for-word translation. So when the translators are looking at the equivalent texts, they'll see the Hebrew text or the Greek text and try and find the closest word that would match it in English and then put it in the Bible. So the idea is then you have an accurate translation. The problem with that, as I've just said, with the idea of love, is that you may well lose the meaning of what was meant to be. So in something like the New Revised Standard Version, you have meaningful word or word for meaning. So when the translators are looking at a particular passage and they see a word and they think, well, there isn't really an equivalent word in English, or maybe that word means something else these days, because remember, we're 2,000 years later. Let's substitute something that has the correct meaning that we think the original authors were trying to go for. So that's kind of the different thing. I've read the ESV version, and I've read quite a lot of the NRSV version. And although there are specific verses that you will go through where if you're looking for them, you will see differences, most of the time as a casual reader, I don't think you really notice that much. In the NRSV, for example, they have more, they call it gender inclusive language, but I think that's going a bit over the top, really. What it means is often they'll say things like men and women, whereas the ESV will just say men. And if you had to choose between the two as a choice, I think one of the more important things is to go to a bookshop, check them out, and just look at the Bible that they've got so that you can check the font size, check the paper colour, see how it feels in your hand, feel the weight. But I would probably come down as a Catholic on the ESV side of things. But there's nothing wrong with reading the NRSV as well. Now, I did mention I don't want you to be intimidated either by the Bible, because I think you should always start, if you're new to the Bible, start with watching the Chosen TV series. That's probably the best thing. And you start with the New Testament. Right, okay. And then if you look, that's the New Testament there. See how small it is compared to the Old Testament. So the New Testament is the Gospel, so Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. You've got Acts, which is a bit like Gospel Part 2, which is what the apostles, what the disciples get up to, and then you've got all the letters. I think they call them the epistles from Paul and some of the other disciples, where they're writing to different people. And then you have Revelations at the end. So you see how small that is. Now, you can get through that in a month or less, even if you're only reading a few pages a day. You can really go through it. Where the Old Testament starts off with Genesis and go through Exodus. You've got the story of Moses and Adam and Eve and Joseph and all those ones as well. But it's definitely a lot chunkier, and it's a lot harder work, the Old Testament. It really is. So I would highly recommend start with start by watching the Chosen TV series, then read the New Testament. You can read it in order, but maybe I would suggest if I was to start with anything in terms of Gospels, if you're not going to read it in the order that it's in the Bible, I would maybe start with John, because it's just so poetic. But there's nothing wrong with starting with Matthew, Mark, Luke and John. There are heavy bits, but trust me, it's good. So you can work your way through the New Testament and then work your way through the Old Testament. But as I say, it can get pretty heavy, and it's pretty wild, the Old Testament as well. I won't do any spoilers. It's pretty amazing. Now, as to what you should be thinking as you're reading, it's important to remember that you've got to read the Bible as a whole thing. That is the New Testament and the Old Testament. So often as a new Christian, you might be saying, well, wait a minute, isn't it just really the New Testament? Why do we need the Old Testament? So let's take a step backwards and just talk about who wrote the Bible. So the Bible was written by men, inspired by God. So that the authors were men and God together. 100% man, 100% God. Or 100% men, 100% God. In the beginnings of most Bibles, you'll find maps or sometimes at the end, but you'll also get introductions to the different books when they give you some important information about what the people behind this particular version of the Bible, who they think the authors were, and who they were writing to. Sometimes you have to take this a pinch of salt because different versions of the Bible will have different views on this thing. But when you're reading the Bible as a whole, well, just reading the Bible, you must always be thinking about, and the particular bit that you're reading, who wrote it, why they wrote it, who they were writing it to, when they were writing it, and the context that it is in within the whole Bible. Now, that might seem a little bit complex at first, because it is, but what it means is that the New Testament is linked to the Old Testament in a very important way. In fact, there's many things in the Old Testament that are foretold in the New Testament. So things happen in the Old Testament. If you think about, for example, Moses guiding the Israelites through the wilderness till eventually they reach the promised land. Well, that's pretty easy to think about. Think about Jesus and salvation for the rest of humanity. They kind of do that. So the Old Testament is in and of itself an important historical and spiritual record of what the Israelites went through. But, and it's important as that, but it's also incredibly important because it foretells in lots of different ways what's coming in the New Testament. Because as Christians, we believe that the Old Testament is kind of preparation for the New Testament, preparation for what's coming, preparation for Jesus, preparation for salvation for everybody. So there we go. Let's have a quick look at, so this is an interesting, so you can get these really tiny little pocket Bibles as well if you wanted something you could do. And what these tend to be is just the New Testament. And again, I wouldn't just recommend just reading the New Testament. You've got to read the Old as well. But this is something nice you can have on you. For example, if it's something that you just want to take to church in your pocket, and when there's a quiet time, you can whip this out and just read some of the New Testament. Although often they have the Psalms in them as well, and this is a ESV version of it. So that's very nice. Where it's not really appropriate to get your phone out or get your tablet out and start reading the Bible from that. So that's pretty good. And what I'll do is I'll put links in the description below this video to these actual books because they are very readable in terms of the font size and the paper colour. The only thing I don't like about this one, though, the Catholic one, is that for some reason they put the page numbers there when they should be there, or they should be there. So that's a little bit odd. I guess while we're here as well, we'll mention a couple of other things just to finish off. First one is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So it's definitely worth picking one of these up. However, it's available for free through lots of different apps as well. Ascension have got it. And the Catechism of the Catholic Church it's kind of like an encyclopedia to what the Catholic Church believes, but it's also a teaching aid as well. So it's not just the A to Z of the Catholic Church and what they believe, but it's also, as you go through it, it teaches you. And you might say, well, why do you need a book like that when you've got this? If you're a new Christian, you're new to Catholicism. Well, what the Catholic Church believes is that the Bible is incredibly important, and Scripture is incredibly important, and it's the basis of what we do. But you also have tradition, so the tradition that's handed down. And you might say, well, wait a minute, don't you just keep going back to the book for that? Well, no, because if we think about the New Testament wasn't available to Christians until, say, the year 90 or 100 AD. So Jesus died in sort of 33, didn't he? Was it 33 AD he died? But for all that time until the New Testament became available, all the disciples had, or the apostles had, and all the Christian converts had, was the Old Testament, which wasn't even in book form. It would have been lots of scrolls, and the teachings of Jesus handed down, via speaking. There may have been some letters as well, like the epistles from Paul and things like that. So it was the oral tradition. And so the Catholic Church believes in scripture, but also tradition going hand in hand. And also you then have 2,000 years of priests and popes and theologians trying to figure out what all this means, because this is written by God and man, so there is truth, but we don't always know what that truth is. We can't always understand it. But where there are issues that need to be sorted out, and things that need to be explained because they're not clear in here, then this is where the Catechism of the Catholic Church comes in. Although I would say there's a really good podcast called The Catechism of the Catholic Church in a Year, and that's really cool to listen to, and you can listen to a bit, and it explains stuff, and by Father Mike, I think, who does it, and it's really good. But what is surprising about the Catechism, it is very readable as a book of its own right. And again, the beauty with books is you can just flick through them. In fact, you can go to the back, and you can go to the index, and you can look up a subject and think, well, what does the Catholic Church think about gambling or drinking or anything like that? And then you can look up the relevant bit, and it will tell you. And it's really, really cool. So again, it's not just for Catholics. Anybody who's interested in Christianity, the Catechism of the Catholic Church is very interesting. And I guess finally, just slightly, so this is a missal. So a missal, this is probably really just for Catholics, to be honest. A myth, this is an old missal, so it's not valid anymore. But when you go to Mass, you have certain readings on certain days of certain years, and the missal guides you with that, so you can look up in advance which readings will be on a particular day. And normally missals have different bookmarks in, so that you can then look at them in advance and then read through with them at the time. These are often available in churches, though, when you go to them. There's free missals online, though, that you can use. Laudate, I think, has a missal with it. And so, you don't really... It's kind of a nice to have this. Once you've got your Bible, once you've got your catechism, a missal might be something that you have. In fact, I did read somewhere that it's not always recommended. Priests don't always like people having missals where they're reading along with the reader, with the Old Testament or the New Testament or the Gospel reader, because it means you're not concentrating on what the person is saying, because you're reading a book. But anyway, so there we go. Hopefully this has been a little bit of a guide. I would suggest, if you're a Catholic or thinking about becoming a Catholic, then the ESV version is good, and the ESV version is good to read on something like Blue Letter Bible. However, if you do have something like the NRSV, or if you're in America with the neighbor North American Bible Revised Standard Edition, that's what it stands for, then the best Bible you can read is the one that you've got. So there we go. If you've got any questions, please leave them down below. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again soon.